A Chronicle of Vlad III Dracula. Prologue. Whispers in the Blood. The Carpathian peaks clawed at a bruised November sky, their snow-dusted flanks holding the land of Wallachia in a cold embrace. Below, in the princely court of Troguliste, shadows clung thickly to the stone corridors, deeper than the winter twilight could explain. In a chamber heavy with tapestries and the scent of beeswax and fear, a boy of 5, small-boned but unnervingly still, watched his father, Vlad II Dracula, Prince of Wallachia, pace. Dracula, the dragon, a name earned in battle, a name signifying the prestigious order he bore, but tonight it felt like the name of a beast cornered. Young Vlad's dark eyes, already too old for his face, absorbed the tension. He heard the muffled arguments beyond the door, the clank of restless armor. He saw the tightness around his father's mouth, the way his hand clenched and unclenched on the hilt of the dagger he never removed, not even in sleep. His mother, Princess Knyazhna, stood by the window, her face pale, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the Ottoman threat loomed like a gathering storm. She clutched a younger boy, Radu, her knuckles white. Vlad didn't understand the complex dance of power, the fragile independence of Wallachia caught between the anvil of the Hungarian kingdom and the hammer of the Ottoman Empire. But he understood fear. He smelled it in the sweat of the guards, saw it flicker in the candles, felt it vibrate in the very stones of the fortress. He understood that the gold medallion bearing the dragon, his father's proud emblem, might not be enough to shield them. And deep within him, a seed took root, a cold understanding that survival in this world demanded more than titles. It demanded claws sharper than any dragon's, a will forged in ice and fire. The whispers of destiny, thick with blood and iron, had found him. Vlad Dracula, son of the dragon, was learning his first lesson. Trust nothing but your own strength.
Chapter 1. The Sultan's Pawn, 1436 to 1448. The journey south was a descent into a terrifying, opulent dream. 5-year-old Vlad and his younger brother, Radu, huddled together in the swaying litter, flanked by impassive janissaries. The lush Wallachian forests gave way to the harsh, sun-baked plains of Thrace, and finally to the impossible city, Edirne, the Ottoman capital. Its minarets pierced the sky like spears, its walls groaned with the weight of empire, its streets teemed with a cacophony of languages and a dizzying array of peoples, Turks, Greeks, Arabs, Serbs, Armenians, all moving under the watchful eye of Sultan Murad II's power. They were not guests, they were hostages, a guarantee of their father Dracula's continued, precarious loyalty to the port. The Sublime Port, they called it, a gateway to unimaginable power and terrifying submission. Vlad, clinging fiercely to his dignity, refused to cry, though Radu often did, his golden curls damp with tears. They were installed in the Enderun, the palace school, alongside sons of other conquered princes and noble captives. Here, the Ottoman Empire honed its future administrators, soldiers, and spies. Life was a strange duality. They received an excellent education, mastering Turkish, Arabic, Persian, studying the Quran, history, mathematics, astronomy, horsemanship, and the art of war. The libraries were vast, the tutors brilliant. Yet, beneath the veneer of privilege, the reality was stark. They were prisoners, their value measured solely by their father's obedience. Disobedience meant death, or worse, a slow unraveling of their identity. Vlad saw it happen to others, saw boys broken and remade as perfect Ottoman servants, their past selves erased. He hardened himself, while Radu, beautiful and pliant, began to charm his tutors and even attract the attention of the Sultan's son, Mehmed. Vlad remained aloof, watchful. He excelled in combat training, his small frame driven by a ferocious will. He learned strategy not just from books, but from observing the intricate, deadly politics of the Ottoman court. The whispered alliances, the sudden disappearances, the executions carried out with chilling efficiency. He witnessed the Khan, the impaling stake, used on rebels and traitors. The sight, the smell, the agonized screams were not just horrors, they were lessons in the ultimate expression of power and terror. The Ottomans didn't just kill, they made an example that silenced dissent for miles. His father's letters were infrequent, filled with coded reassurances and veiled pleas for patience. Vlad learned to decipher the subtext. Wallachia was a puppet state dancing on a knife edge. The Hungarians, led by the formidable warlord John Hunyadi, pressed from the north, urging rebellion against the Turks. Dracula walked a tightrope, paying tribute to the Sultan while secretly negotiating with Hungary. Vlad understood the precariousness, the constant threat hanging over his family back home. One day, news arrived like a physical blow. Dracula, along with Hunyadi, had launched a crusade against the Ottomans. Vlad felt a surge of fierce pride, quickly extinguished by icy dread. He and Radu were hostages. Their lives were forfeit. He braced himself for the executioner's blade. But Sultan Murad, coldly calculating, stayed his hand. The boys were valuable chips. Instead, the punishment was psychological torture, months of uncertainty, veiled threats, and the constant reminder of their utter vulnerability. The crusade failed disastrously at the Battle of Varna, 1444. Hunyadi fled. Dracula barely escaped. The price of survival was higher tribute and deeper humiliation. The experience forged Vlad's core. He saw the futility of open rebellion without overwhelming strength. He learned the Ottoman art of psychological warfare, the power of terror. He mastered the languages and customs of his enemy, becoming fluent in their world while never belonging to it. He nurtured a cold, implacable hatred for the Turks who held him captive, and a deep distrust for the treacherous politics of Christendom. By the time he was 12, Vlad Dracula was no longer a frightened child. He was a weapon being tempered in the fires of the Sultan's court, his soul armored in steel and shadow, waiting for the moment to strike. He was the dragon's son, learning to breathe fire in the belly of the beast.
Chapter 2. Thorns and Thrones, 1448. Idiran buzzed with frantic energy. Messengers arrived daily, their horses lathered, bearing dispatches sealed with the double-headed eagle of Byzantium or the raven of Hungary. The great Sultan Murad II, weary of the burdens of rule, had abdicated in favor of his ambitious 19-year-old son, Mehmed. But Mehmed's youthful arrogance quickly led to disaster. Sensing weakness, the Christian powers, orchestrated by the relentless John Hunyadi, launched another crusade. Vlad, now 17, watched the chaos unfold with a predator's stillness. He saw Mehmed's panic, the hurried recall of his father from retirement. He saw the might of the Ottoman war machine mobilize with terrifying speed. The destination, Kosovo Field. The stakes, the very survival of Ottoman power in Europe. Then, like a lightning bolt, news arrived that changed everything. Hunyadi was marching south, and not just marching, he was winning. Ottoman garrisons fell. The road to Edirne seemed open. A tremor of hope, dangerous and intoxicating, ran through the captive princes. Freedom? Revenge? For Vlad, it was the moment he had been forged for.
His father, Dracul, had been assassinated the year before, murdered in a marsh near Balteni by rebellious Wallachian boyars, nobles, backed by Hunyadi's Hungarians. His older brother, Mircea, heir apparent, had been tortured, his eyes burned out with hot irons, buried alive. The Wallachian throne soaked in his family's blood stood vacant. The Turks, preoccupied with Hunyadi, saw an opportunity. They needed a puppet on the Wallachian throne to secure their flank, someone loyal or controllable. Vlad presented himself. He knew the land, the language, the people. He was Dracul's son, and he had spent his formative years at the Ottoman court. He pledged loyalty to Sultan Murad, now back in command, offering Wallachia as a vassal state in exchange for the throne and Turkish military support. It was a devil's bargain, but it was his only chance. Murad, needing stability against Hunyadi, agreed. With a contingent of Ottoman cavalry, his jailers turned, for the moment, his escort. Vlad crossed the Danube into Wallachia in late 1448. He wasn't welcomed as a liberator. Hunyadi's candidate, Vladislav II, a dynasty rival, backed by Hungarian troops and the treacherous boyars who had murdered his family, already held Târgoviște. Vlad's forces were small, his support base thin. He was seen as the Sultan's creature, a Turkish puppet. His reign lasted barely 2 months. It was a desperate, brutal scramble. He tried to rally support, reminding the boyars of his lineage, promising vengeance for his father and brother. But the shadow of Ottoman backing alienated many. When news arrived that Murad had crushed Hunyadi at the Second Battle of Kosovo, October 1448, Vlad's already tenuous position collapsed. The Hungarian threat receded, and with it, the Sultan's immediate need for Vlad. Vladislav II, strengthened by returning Hungarian units, marched on Târgoviște. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Vlad faced a stark choice: die fighting a hopeless battle or flee. He chose survival. With a handful of loyal followers, he slipped away under cover of night, abandoning his nascent throne. His dream of vengeance and rule had lasted less than a season. He fled, not back to Ottoman protection. That door was likely closed now that his usefulness had ended, but north into the treacherous, shifting sands of Moldavia, seeking refuge with his cousin, Prince Bogdan II. The dragon's first flight had ended in ignominious retreat. The taste of defeat was bitter, but it taught him invaluable lessons about the fickleness of boyars, the unreliability of foreign powers, and the absolute necessity of securing power through ruthless, unequivocal control. He would not be a pawn again.
Chapter 3. The Wolf's Lair, 1448–1456. Moldavia was a land of deep forests and deeper intrigues, a buffer state perpetually squeezed between Poland, Hungary, and the Ottoman shadow. Vlad found sanctuary at the court of his cousin, Prince Bogdan II, in Suceava. Bogdan, locked in his own struggle for survival against Polish influence and internal rivals, offered Vlad shelter but little else. Vlad became a shadow prince, a constant reminder of fallen dynasties and bloody feuds. These were years of bitter exile and intense observation. Vlad moved through the Moldavian court like a specter, absorbing its politics, its strengths, and its fatal weaknesses. He saw how Bogdan tried to balance powerful, fractious boyars, how he navigated the demands of King Casimir IV of Poland. He witnessed the constant undercurrent of betrayal. He also saw the strength of a fortified position, the loyalty a prince could command if he projected absolute authority and ruthlessly punished dissent. He honed his military skills, accompanying Moldavian campaigns against Polish incursions or Tartar raids, learning the brutal realities of border warfare. He also witnessed family tragedy again. In 1451, Bogdan II was assassinated by a rival, Petru Aron, backed by Polish interests. Vlad, likely targeted as well, barely escaped with his life. The murder of another protector, another kinsman, reinforced his darkest convictions. The world was ruled by treachery, and only the strong, the vigilant, and the utterly merciless survived. He fled Moldavia, his path northward blocked by Polish enemies. His only option was to turn south and west towards the lion's den, Hungary, and the court of his father's nemesis, John Hunyadi. Approaching Hunyadi was a perilous gamble. Hunyadi had backed Vladislav II, the man who now sat on Vlad's throne. He had been instrumental in the crusades that had endangered Vlad's life as a hostage. He was the champion of Christendom against the Turk, while Vlad was still tainted by his Ottoman upbringing and his brief Turkish-backed reign. Yet Vlad possessed something Hunyadi needed desperately: intimate, unparalleled knowledge of the Ottoman enemy, their tactics, their court politics, their strengths, and their vulnerabilities. He presented himself not as a supplicant prince, but as a valuable asset. He swore allegiance to Hungary and the Catholic faith, a necessary political conversion, as his family were Orthodox. He offered his expertise on the Ottomans, his unwavering hatred for them, and his burning desire to reclaim Wallachia, a Wallachia that would be a loyal Hungarian buffer against the Sultan. Hunyadi, the pragmatic warlord, recognized Vlad's potential. He saw the fierce intelligence, the hardened resolve, and the deep well of hatred directed squarely at the Turks. He granted Vlad refuge, likely assigning him a minor command in the volatile Transylvanian borderlands, perhaps as Vaida, voivode, overseeing Hungarian interests against both Turkish raids and troublesome local Saxon towns like Sibiu and Brasov. Here, on the bloody frontier, Vlad Dracula truly began to forge his legend and his methods. Tasked with defending Hungary's southeastern flank, he employed tactics learned in the harshest schools: swift raids, ambushes, and the systematic use of terror. He dealt with bandits, Ottoman scouts, and rebellious Saxon merchants who often traded with the enemy or resisted Hungarian authority with appalling severity. Impalement, learned in Edirne, became his signature. He erected forests of stakes outside captured strongholds or along disputed borders. The message was brutal and clear. Defiance meant an excruciating, public death. He earned a reputation, feared by his enemies, unsettling to his allies. He was no longer just Vlad. He was becoming Tepesh, the Impaler. He also meticulously built a power base. He gathered around him loyal men, hardened soldiers, outcasts, those disillusioned with the corrupt boyar class or the vacillating policies of Vladislav II. He studied Wallachia, receiving intelligence from sympathizers, plotting his return. He waited, coiled like a viper, for the moment Hunyadi's gaze turned towards the Danube. That moment arrived in 1456. The new Ottoman Sultan, the ambitious, brilliant, and terrifying Mehmed II, Vlad's childhood companion turned nemesis, had set his sights on the ultimate prize: Constantinople. The mighty bastion of Byzantium fell in May 1453, sending shock waves through Christendom. Emboldened, Mehmed pushed north. In 1456, he laid siege to Belgrade, the key to Hungary. Hunyadi rallied a crusading army. Vlad, finally given a significant command by Hunyadi, fought with ferocious courage at the siege. The Christian forces, against all odds, repelled the Turks in a bloody, chaotic battle. Hunyadi, however, died shortly after, a victim of plague that swept the camp. Hunyadi's death created a vacuum of power. But for Vlad, it was also an opportunity. With the Hungarian champion gone and the Ottoman threat momentarily blunted, Wallachia was vulnerable. Vladislav II was weak, unpopular with many boyars for his subservience to Hungary and his failure to protect the land. Vlad, battle-hardened, feared by his enemies, and crucially possessing the tacit backing of Hunyadi's powerful son, Laszlo Hunyadi, for now, saw his chance. The dragon, seasoned in exile, baptized in frontier blood, and radiating a terrifying aura, was ready to reclaim his birthright.
Chapter 4. The Impaler's Ascension, 1456 to 1457. The late autumn of 1456 saw Vlad Tepes cross the Carpathians into Wallachia, not as a fugitive, but as a conqueror. He didn't march with a vast Hungarian army. His force was lean, composed of loyal Moldavians, hardened Transylvanian mercenaries, and Wallachian outlaws and peasants drawn to his fierce reputation and promise of order. Speed and terror were his weapons. He bypassed strongholds, striking directly at the heart. His target? Târgoviște. Vladislav II, caught unprepared, scrambled to muster his boyars and Hungarian garrisons. They met Vlad's forces near Târgoviște. The battle was short, brutal, and decisive. Vlad's men, fighting with the ferocity of those who had nothing to lose and everything to gain, shattered Vladislav's less motivated troops. Vladislav himself was captured. Vlad offered no mercy to the man who had occupied his throne and represented the forces that destroyed his family. Vladislav was executed, his head likely sent as a gruesome trophy to the Hungarian court, a stark declaration of independence. Vlad entered Târgoviște not to cheers, but to a stunned, fearful silence. He knew his position was precarious. The boyars were deeply suspicious, many having supported Vladislav or profited under the Daneshti. The Saxons of Transylvania viewed him with outright hostility, remembering his brutal frontier campaigns. Hungary was an uncertain ally, its power fragmented after Hunyadi's death. And to the south, Sultan Mehmed II watched, waiting to see if this new dragon prince would be a loyal vassal or a rebellious thorn. Vlad wasted no time. His reign began not with coronation feasts, but with a chilling demonstration of power, the Great Easter Purge. He invited the boyars, the great landowners, military leaders, and their families to a lavish feast in Târgoviște's princely court. Suspicion warred with obligation. Attendance was mandatory for those who wished to retain their status. The feast proceeded, the wine flowed, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. As the evening wore on, Vlad rose. His voice, cold and clear, cut through the murmur. He spoke of betrayal, betrayal of his father, Dracul, betrayal of his brother, Mircea, betrayal of Wallachia itself to foreign powers. He spoke of weakness, corruption, and treason. Then the trap sprang. His soldiers, positioned throughout the hall, seized the oldest and most powerful boyars and their sons. Panic erupted. The younger, healthier boyars and their retainers were disarmed and forced outside. Before the horrified eyes of the remaining guests and the gathered townsfolk, Vlad ordered the impalement of the captured elders. Simultaneously, he forced the younger nobles and their families on a brutal death march to the ruins of Poianari Castle, high in the Carpathian gorges overlooking the Argeș River. The journey, over 50 miles through harsh terrain, was a deliberate ordeal. Many perished along the way. The survivors, broken and exhausted, were then forced to rebuild the ruined fortress under the lash, a monument to Vlad's power and a prison for the survivors of the old order. Poianari became his eagle's nest, impregnable and terrifying. The purge was catastrophic for the old boyar class. Hundreds perished, impaled, worked to death, or executed outright. Their lands and wealth were confiscated by the crown, breaking their traditional power base overnight. Vlad replaced them with men of his own choosing, loyal commoners, minor nobles who owed everything to him, and foreigners trusted for their lack of local ties. He created a new aristocracy, utterly dependent on the prince. This wasn't just vengeance, it was radical state-building. Vlad centralized power to an unprecedented degree. He smashed the boyar's ability to challenge him or make private deals with foreign powers. He filled his treasury with confiscated wealth, funding his army and ambitious projects. He established a network of spies, reporting directly to him, ensuring no conspiracy could take root. He declared himself the sole source of law and justice. His methods were brutal, but they achieved what decades of weak princes had failed to do: create a strong, centralized, and obedient Wallachia. The Impaler had ascended, bathing his throne in blood to forge a weapon capable of facing the Ottoman storm.
Chapter 5. Order of the Dragon, 1457 to 1460. With the boyar threat shattered, Vlad Tepes turned his formidable energy and iron will towards the transformation of Wallachia. His vision was stark: a powerful, independent, and morally rigid state, capable of resisting the Ottoman tide. He became a whirlwind of reform, his actions driven by a blend of pragmatism, religious fervor, both Orthodox zeal and political alignment with Catholic Christendom, and an almost pathological obsession with order and control. The sword of justice. Vlad's concept of law was absolute and brutally enforced. He declared war on crime, particularly theft. Petty thieves faced impalement alongside murderers and traitors. He famously placed a golden cup by a well in the central square of Târgoviște. Anyone could drink from it, no one dared steal it. The punishment for theft was death, and Vlad's justice was swift and inescapable. He traveled the land, personally administering judgment, often presiding over mass executions. While terrifying, this draconian approach virtually eradicated common crime. Peasants could travel the roads safely. Merchants felt secure. Fear, Vlad understood, was a powerful deterrent. Better feared than loved, if you cannot be both, Machiavelli would later write. Vlad embodied this centuries before The Prince. The hammer of the Church. Vlad was a devoted patron of the Orthodox Church, seeing it as a pillar of Wallachian identity and a bulwark against Islam. He endowed monasteries lavishly, Snagov, Tismana, Komana, restoring them and granting vast lands. He invited learned monks, supported religious art, and strictly enforced religious observance. Yet his piety was inseparable from his authority. He demanded absolute loyalty from the clergy. Any monk or priest suspected of corruption, laziness, or disloyalty faced severe punishment. The Church became an instrument of state control, preaching obedience to the God-appointed prince. His support for orthodoxy also served to distance Wallachia from Catholic Hungary, asserting cultural independence. The anvil of economy. Vlad understood that military strength required economic power. He encouraged trade, but strictly regulated it. He punished dishonest merchants severely, ensuring fair weights and measures. He promoted agriculture, knowing a well-fed populace was essential. He used the wealth confiscated from the boyars to fund public works, repairing roads and bridges, vital for moving troops and trade, strengthening town fortifications, and draining marshes to create arable land. He fostered local crafts, reducing dependence on expensive imports, particularly from the often hostile Saxon cities of Transylvania.
The forge of the army. The core of Vlad's power was his army.
He created a formidable military force, distinct from the unreliable boyar levies. He recruited heavily from free peasants and townsmen, offering land and protection in return for loyal service. He maintained a large, well-trained standing army, paid directly from the princely treasury, ensuring their loyalty was solely to him. He drilled them relentlessly in guerrilla tactics perfected on the Transylvanian frontier: ambushes, night attacks, scorched earth, and the psychological terror of impalement. He stockpiled weapons and fortified key points along the Danube and throughout the country. His soldiers, hardened by discipline and success, were fiercely loyal to the prince who paid them fairly and led them without flinching from hardship. The thorn in the Saxon side. Vlad's relationship with the Transylvanian Saxons remained poisonous. The wealthy merchant cities of Sibiu, Hermannstadt, and Brasov, Kronstadt, had long enjoyed special privileges granted by Hungarian kings. They often traded freely with the Ottomans, undermining Vlad's efforts to impose economic sanctions. They also harbored Vlad's political enemies, dynasty claimants, and disgruntled boyars who had escaped his purge. Vlad saw this as treason. He imposed heavy tariffs on Saxon goods. When the Saxons resisted, he launched punitive raids across the mountains. He burned Saxon villages, captured merchants, and impaled those he deemed collaborators. He laid siege to Brasov itself in 1459, extracting a humiliating treaty that forced the Saxons to expel his enemies and submit to his economic demands. His cruelty towards the Saxons became legendary, feeding the horrific narratives that would soon spread through Germany. Vlad ruled with an intensity that brooked no dissent. He demanded absolute honesty and loyalty. He despised idleness, drunkenness, and deceit. He worked tirelessly, often sleeping only a few hours a night, constantly inspecting, judging, planning. He lived relatively simply, eschewing the lavish excesses of other courts, channeling resources into his army and fortifications. To the common people, the peasants and townsfolk who benefited from safe roads, low crime, and protection from arbitrary boyar oppression, Vlad was a harsh but just ruler, a strong prince who defended Wallachia. To the surviving boyars, the Saxons, and his enemies, he was a murderous tyrant, a monster. But by 1460, Vlad had achieved his goal. Wallachia was strong, unified, obedient, and poised, like a drawn blade, facing south towards the Ottoman Empire. The dragon's shadow stretched long and dark, a warning to Sultan Mehmed II that Wallachia would not bend its knee without a fight. The order was draconian, and its enforcer was ready.
Chapter 6. Defiance at the Gates, 1460 to 1462. The fragile peace between Wallachia and the Ottoman Empire was built on shifting sands. Sultan Mehmed II, the Conqueror, was consolidating his vast domains. He demanded not just tribute, but unquestioning obedience. Vlad Tepes, however, was no ordinary vassal. His refusal to pay the increased tribute demanded in 1459 was the first crack. His brutal execution of 2 Ottoman envoys who refused to remove their turbans in his presence, a grave insult to Ottoman protocol, was a declaration of war. He had them nailed their turbans to their skulls. Mehmed, enraged but preoccupied with other fronts, initially sent smaller forces. Vlad annihilated them using scorched earth tactics and ambushes in the Wallachian forests and marshes. By 1461, Vlad escalated his defiance. He launched a daring night raid across the frozen Danube into Ottoman Bulgaria. Striking with lightning speed and utter ruthlessness, his forces devastated the area around Giurgiu, massacring Ottoman garrisons and impaling thousands, soldiers and civilians alike. His goal was strategic terror, to make the borderlands uninhabitable, to demonstrate his reach, and to shatter the myth of Ottoman invincibility. He sent letters to King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary and other Christian rulers, detailing his victories, often exaggerated, and pleading for a united crusade. He wrote to Corvinus, "I have killed peasants, men and women, old and young, who lived at Oblachitsa and Novoselo, where the Danube flows into the sea.
We killed 23,884 Turks, without counting those whom we burned in homes, or the Turks whose heads were cut by our soldiers. Thus, Your Highness, you must know that I have broken the peace with Sultan Mehmed." The raid was a stunning tactical success and a colossal provocation. Mehmed could no longer ignore the Wallachian viper. In the spring of 1462, the conqueror moved. He assembled one of the largest armies ever seen in Europe. Estimates range from 60,000 to over 100,000 men, including the elite janissaries, Sipahi cavalry, and formidable artillery. His fleet sailed up the Danube. The target, Târgoviște. The goal, the annihilation of Vlad Tepes and the reduction of Wallachia to a compliant Ottoman province. Vlad faced overwhelming odds. His army, though well-trained and fiercely loyal, numbered perhaps 30,000 at most. He couldn't meet the Ottomans in open battle. His strategy was one of asymmetric warfare, environmental devastation, and psychological terror on an unprecedented scale.
1. Scorched earth. As the vast Ottoman army lumbered north through Bulgaria, Vlad ordered a systematic evacuation and destruction. Villages were burned, crops ruined, wells poisoned, livestock driven away or slaughtered. The land ahead of the Ottomans became a desolate wasteland, offering no sustenance or shelter. Starvation and disease began to stalk Mehmed's host before they even reached Wallachia. 2. Guerrilla harassment. Small, mobile units of Wallachian cavalry and infantry constantly harassed the Ottoman flanks and supply lines. They launched hit-and-run attacks, ambushed foraging parties, and picked off stragglers. The vast Ottoman army became a lumbering giant, constantly stung by an invisible foe. 3. The night attack. June 17, 1462. The masterstroke. As the exhausted Ottoman army finally neared Târgoviște and camped for the night near the capital, Vlad prepared his most audacious move. Under cover of darkness, he divided his elite cavalry into several columns. He personally led one group, infiltrating deep into the heart of the Ottoman camp near the village of Târgoviște itself. His goal was nothing less than assassinating Sultan Mehmed. Chaos erupted. Wallachian forces, shouting "Tepes, Tepes," slashed through tents, slaughtered sleeping soldiers, and set fires. Panic spread like wildfire through the Ottoman ranks. In the confusion and darkness, the Wallachians inflicted massive casualties and nearly reached Mehmed's tent. Mehmed himself was reportedly saved only by the bravery of his janissaries, who held the line long enough for him to mount a horse and escape the immediate carnage. Though Vlad failed to kill the Sultan, the night attack was a devastating psychological blow. It shattered the Ottoman sense of security and proved that even the mighty conqueror was vulnerable. 4. The Forest of the Impaled. The final horrific act of psychological warfare. As Mehmed's battered and demoralized army finally approached the outskirts of Târgoviște, they were met with a sight that froze the blood of even the most hardened veterans. Before the city gates, stretching for nearly a mile, stood a forest of stakes. Impaled upon them were thousands of corpses, Ottoman prisoners captured during the campaign, including high-ranking officers. Birds circled the gruesome spectacle. The stench was unbearable. Estimates of the number range from 10,000 to 20,000. The message was unequivocal. This was the fate awaiting any invader of Wallachia. Mehmed, gazing upon this forest of the dead, reportedly admitted, "I cannot take the land from a man who can do such things." Ottoman chroniclers wrote of the Sultan's horror and the devastating effect on his army's morale. Mehmed, his army weakened by disease, hunger, constant harassment, and the psychological trauma of the night attack in the Forest of the Impaled, realized a prolonged campaign in the Wallachian wilderness against such a ruthless foe was unsustainable. He ordered a retreat. His fleet sailed back down the Danube. His army limped back towards Edirne. Vlad Tepes had achieved the impossible. Through a combination of brilliant strategy, ruthless scorched earth,
audacious raids, and the weaponization of terror on a monumental scale, he had repelled the greatest military power of the age. The dragon had scorched the wings of the conqueror. Wallachia stood defiant, but at a terrible cost, and the victory was fragile. The Ottomans would be back, and Vlad's Christian allies were already plotting against him.
Chapter 7. The Betrayal. 1462. The smoke still hung heavy over the ravaged fields south of Târgoviște, mingling with the lingering, sickly sweet stench of decay from the forest of the impaled. Vlad Tepes stood on the battlements, surveying the cost of his victory. His land was scorched, his people scattered and suffering, his army depleted. But they were free. He had defied the conqueror. Surely now Christendom would rally. Surely King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, to whom Vlad had sent desperate pleas and triumphant reports, would send the promised reinforcements and launch the Great Crusade? The answer came not in the form of Hungarian knights, but in the clatter of hooves carrying a different message. Betrayal. It arrived in whispers at first, then in damning evidence. While Vlad fought for his life and the survival of his realm against the Ottoman Colossus, his enemies had been busy. The Saxon smear campaign. The merchants of Brasov and Sibiu, nursing deep hatred for Vlad after his punitive raids and economic stranglehold, had unleashed a relentless propaganda offensive. They commissioned pamphlets, printed in German cities like Nuremberg and Bamberg, detailing Vlad's atrocities, real and grotesquely exaggerated. Tales of mass impalements, including women and children, torture, feasts among the dying, and sadistic whims flooded Europe. These pamphlets, often illustrated with lurid woodcuts, portrayed Vlad not as a defender of Christendom, but as a bloodthirsty, inhuman monster, worse than the Turk. Their goal was clear: to isolate Vlad politically and justify Hungarian intervention. Radu and the Fair. Sultan Mehmed, though forced to retreat, was far from finished. He possessed a potent weapon: Vlad's younger brother, Radu. While Vlad had hardened in Edirne, Radu had thrived. Beautiful, charming, and deeply immersed in Ottoman culture and religion, he had likely converted to Islam. Radu had become a favorite at Mehmed's court, even rumored to be the Sultan's lover. Mehmed now proclaimed Radu the rightful Prince of Wallachia. Backed by Ottoman gold, promises of peace, and a fresh contingent of Janissaries, Radu crossed the Danube. His message was seductive to a war-weary, terrorized population and boyars who still hated Vlad: stability, an end to Vlad's draconian rule, and peace with the powerful Ottoman Empire. Hungarian duplicity. King Matthias Corvinus was in a bind. He feared Ottoman power, but distrusted Vlad's ambition and brutality. The Saxon smear campaign painted Vlad as a liability, potentially provoking further Ottoman wrath against Hungary itself. Corvinus also coveted Wallachian resources and strategic position. He saw an opportunity. Instead of sending aid, he began secret negotiations with the Saxons and likely with Radu's Ottoman backers. He needed a pretext to move against Vlad. The Saxon pamphlets provided the moral justification. Radu offered a plausible alternative ruler. Vlad, focused on rebuilding and preparing for the inevitable Ottoman return, marched north toward the Carpathian passes, hoping to meet Corvinus and finally secure the promised Hungarian support. He reached the fortified town of Piatra Neamț in Moldavia. Here, in August 1462, he was met not by allies, but by treason. Corvinus's general, Ștefan Vardi, arrived not with reinforcements, but with a summons for Vlad to meet the king at Brasov to discuss military cooperation. It was a trap. When Vlad arrived near Brasov, he was ambushed by Hungarian troops loyal to Corvinus. After a fierce skirmish, he was captured. The charges, heavily based on the Saxon pamphlets, were monstrous. Mass murder, impalement of innocents, collusion with the Ottomans, a blatant inversion of the truth, and tyranny. Vlad was thrown into a dungeon, first in Brasov, then transferred to the fortress of Visegrad, high on the Danube bend north of Buda. While Vlad languished in a Hungarian prison, Radu, backed by Ottoman arms and Mehmed's blessing, swept into Wallachia. Facing little organized resistance from Vlad's depleted forces and welcomed by many boyars and peasants exhausted by years of war and draconian rule, Radu took Târgoviște. He promised peace, restored boyar privileges under Ottoman oversight, and open trade with the Porte. Wallachia became, once again, a compliant Ottoman vassal state. The dragon was caged, his victory against Mehmed nullified not by the Sultan's armies, but by the knives of his Christian neighbors. The betrayal was complete, a devastating lesson that Vlad's greatest enemy might not have been the Ottoman Empire, but the jealousies, fears, and treacheries of Christendom itself. The fortress walls of Visegrad closed around him, a monument not to his crimes, but to the political realities that crushed his defiance.
Chapter 8. The Prisoner of Visegrad, 1462 to 1474. Visegrad Castle, perched dramatically on a cliff overlooking the Danube bend, was a gilded cage for fallen royalty. For Vlad Chepes, it was a descent into a different kind of hell. After the furious energy of battle and rule, he was confined, isolated, stripped of power. His cell was likely relatively comfortable by prison standards. He was still a prince, a valuable political pawn, but it was a prison nonetheless. The thick stone walls muffled the world. The narrow window offered a view of the flowing Danube, a cruel reminder of the land he had lost. The initial years were the darkest. The humiliation of betrayal by Corvinus, the man he had fought alongside and begged for help, burned like acid. The knowledge that his brother Radu, the Ottoman favorite, now sat on his throne in Târgoviște, undoing everything he had built, was a constant torment. He was at the mercy of King Matthias, who kept him imprisoned primarily for his value as a bargaining chip and to appease the Saxons, but also out of fear and distrust. The lurid Saxon pamphlets continued to circulate, cementing his monstrous reputation across Europe. He was Dracula now in the popular imagination, a name derived from his father's Dracul, meaning son of the dragon, but twisted by propaganda into a byword for unspeakable evil. Vlad adapted. Survival was his oldest skill. He began a meticulous campaign to rehabilitate himself in the eyes of his captor and the Hungarian court. He played the penitent. He formally converted, or reconfirmed his conversion to Catholicism, embracing the faith of the Hungarian king with apparent fervor. He cultivated contacts within the Hungarian nobility, particularly those hostile to Ottoman influence. He emphasized his unwavering opposition to the Turks, positioning himself as Christendom's most experienced and implacable foe, unjustly maligned. He subtly reminded Matthias of his military prowess and the strategic advantage of having a loyal, battle-hardened prince on the Ottoman border. He also found an unexpected ally, Ilona Siliani, Matthias Corvinus's own aunt. Drawn perhaps by Vlad's charisma, his plight, or political calculation, Ilona became his advocate and eventually his wife. This marriage, arranged around 1474, was a masterstroke. It bound Vlad to the Hungarian family crown, transforming him from a despised prisoner into a member of the court. It provided him with legitimacy, protection, and a crucial political lifeline.
He moved from the dungeon to the castle apartments. He was allowed to ride, hunt, and participate in court life, though always under watchful eyes. He watched events unfold. Radu's rule in Wallachia proved weak and unpopular. His reliance on Ottoman troops and his perceived subservience alienated many. He died in 1475, possibly of illness, possibly poisoned. The Wallachian throne became a prize fought over by various dynasty claimants and Ottoman puppets, plunging the principality back into chaos. The Ottoman threat remained constant. Mehmed II continued his relentless expansion, pressing hard on Hungary's southern borders. Matthias Corvinus, facing increasing Ottoman pressure and instability in Wallachia, began to reassess his imprisoned asset. Vlad's constant lobbying, his marriage connection, his military reputation, and the deteriorating situation south of the Carpathians gradually shifted the king's perspective. Vlad was no saint, but he was a proven warrior who hated the Turks and knew Wallachia intimately. In a world of shifting alliances and existential threats, the son of the dragon, tamed and bound to the Hungarian crown, might be a useful weapon after all. By 1474, the chains were loosening. Vlad Dracula, the prisoner prince, was being groomed for a return to the stage he had once dominated. The dragon, though scarred and constrained, was preparing to fly again.
Chapter 9. The Last Flight, 1475 to 1476. The air in Buda crackled with tension. Ottoman armies threatened Hungarian fortresses along the Sava and Danube. Wallachia, after Radu's death, was a cauldron of civil war between Basarab-Laiota, a dynasty backed by the Ottomans, and another claimant, Basarab-Tsepelush. King Matthias Corvinus needed a strong hand to stabilize the southern flank. His gaze fell upon Vlad Dracula, now his brother-in-law, his Catholic convert, and the most feared name along the Ottoman border. In 1475, Vlad was formally released. His mission to reclaim the Wallachian throne for himself and Hungary. Matthias provided troops, but cautiously, not enough for a full invasion, but sufficient to bolster Vlad's claim and his own loyalists within Wallachia. Vlad's return was swift and brutal. He crossed the Carpathians, rallying supporters who remembered his strong rule and despised the chaos under Ottoman puppets. He clashed with Laiota's forces, driving them back towards the Danube. By November 1475, Vlad Dracula once again sat on the throne in Târgoviște. His third reign had begun. It was a fragile victory. Laiota fled to Ottoman protection. Mehmed II, furious at this Hungarian-backed challenge to his influence, prepared a response. Vlad knew time was short. He moved quickly to consolidate power, punishing Laiota's supporters with familiar severity. He rebuilt his forces and appealed to Matthias for more substantial support for the inevitable Ottoman counterattack. He also sought alliances with his cousin, Stephen III of Moldavia, Stephen the Great, a formidable warrior who had also inflicted stunning defeats on the Ottomans. Stephen, however, was wary. He remembered Vlad's ambition and ruthlessness. He also had his own complex relationship with Hungary and the Ottomans. He offered no immediate military aid. Matthias, preoccupied with Ottoman threats closer to home, and perhaps still harboring doubts about Vlad's ultimate loyalty, sent only token reinforcements. Vlad was isolated. In the summer of 1476, the blow fell. Sultan Mehmed, determined to crush this persistent thorn, dispatched a massive army under the command of his trusted general, Hadim Suleiman Pasha. The Ottoman host crossed the Danube, joined by Basarab Laiota and his Wallachian supporters. Vlad, outnumbered and lacking significant Hungarian or Moldavian aid, knew he couldn't hold Târgoviște. He retreated north, employing his familiar scorched earth tactics and guerrilla harassment, hoping to draw the Ottomans into the inhospitable terrain and buy time for Hungarian reinforcements to arrive. The decisive battle occurred near Bucharest, at a place called Razvad, or Snug Off, accounts vary, in late November or December 1476. Vlad, commanding a mixed force of his loyalists, Moldavian auxiliaries, Stephen had finally sent some troops, perhaps seeing the danger, and Hungarian contingents, fought with his customary ferocity. The battle was fierce and chaotic. For a time, Vlad's tactical skill held the Ottomans at bay, but the numbers told. Lyota's Wallachian forces, fighting alongside the Ottomans, exploited gaps in Vlad's lines. In the midst of the melee, near the shores of Lake Snugov, Vlad Dracula was cut down.
The circumstances of his death remain shrouded in mystery and conflicting accounts. Killed by Ottoman soldiers, the most straightforward account, surrounded and overwhelmed in battle. Assassinated by disloyal Wallachians, stabbed in the back by his own men, possibly bribed by Lyota or the Ottomans during the confusion of battle. Mistaken identity. Some sources claim he was killed by his own Moldavian allies who didn't recognize him in the heat of battle. Betrayed by the boyars. A recurring theme in his life, the treacherous nobility finally succeeding. Whatever the exact manner, the result was the same. Vlad III Dracula, voivode of Wallachia, the Impaler, the dragon's son, was dead. He was about 45 years old. His body was reportedly decapitated. His head was sent to Constantinople as proof for Sultan Mehmed II. The rest of his body was said to have been buried at the isolated monastery on Snagov Island, the very place associated with his death, though no definitive grave has ever been found. The dragon's last flight ended in the mud and blood of a Wallachian battlefield, defeated not solely by the Ottomans, but by the isolation, betrayal, and the sheer exhaustion of a life lived perpetually on the edge of the abyss. His reign lasted barely a year.
Chapter 10. The Shadow of the Impaler, 1476 to present. The Ottoman army withdrew, leaving Basarab Lyota on the Wallachian throne, a compliant vassal. Vlad Dracula's brief third reign ended as abruptly as it began. His head, displayed in Constantinople, was a grim trophy. His body, if buried at Snagov, rested in an unmarked grave, its location lost to time and the encroaching waters of the lake. In the immediate aftermath, it seemed the Impaler's legacy would be one of infamy and failure. The Saxon pamphlets continued to circulate, their horrific tales of his cruelty becoming the dominant narrative across Europe. To Western Christendom, he was Dracula, a monster, a cautionary tale of tyranny gone mad. Yet the shadow he cast was longer and more complex than his enemies could have imagined. The folkloric defender. Within Wallachia and neighboring regions, a different Vlad endured. Among the peasantry, oral traditions remembered him not just as a tyrant, but as a harsh but just ruler who protected the common man from the oppression of greedy boyars and foreign merchants. Tales circulated of his cunning, his strength, his relentless war against the Turk. He became a figure of folk legend, a defender of the land, his brutality often contextualized as necessary against treacherous nobles and invaders. Monasteries he endowed, like Snagov, despite the mystery surrounding his grave, became sites of local veneration. In the immediate aftermath, it seemed the Impaler's legacy would be one of infamy and failure. The Saxon pamphlets continued to circulate, their horrific tales of his cruelty becoming the dominant narrative across Europe. To Western Christendom, he was Dracula, a monster, a cautionary tale of tyranny gone mad. Yet the shadow he cast was longer and more complex than his enemies could have imagined. The historical paradox. Historians grappled with the contradictions. How to reconcile the undeniable atrocities, the mass impalements, the boyar purges, the Saxon terror, with the achievements, the creation of a strong centralized state, the fierce defense of Wallachia's autonomy, the stunning military victories against overwhelming odds. He was seen as a product of his time, an era of unparalleled brutality, constant warfare, and Machiavellian politics avant la lettre. He became a symbol of ruthless realpolitik, a prince who used terror as a deliberate instrument of statecraft. Nationalist Romanian historians of the 19th and 20th centuries, seeking heroic precursors, emphasized his role as a defender against Ottoman imperialism, downplaying his darker aspects. He remained a deeply controversial, ambiguous figure. Bram Stoker's vampire. In 1897, Irish author Bram Stoker unleashed Dracula upon the world. Stoker, researching Eastern European folklore, stumbled upon the name Dracula in a book mentioning a voivode Dracula who fought the Turks. Intrigued by the name, meaning son of the devil in Romanian, a misinterpretation of Dracul, and drawing on vampire myths, he crafted his immortal Count. Stoker's Dracula bore almost no resemblance to the historical Vlad beyond the name and a generalized Transylvanian, Wallachian setting. Yet the fusion was potent. The historical impaler's reputation for cruelty and his evocative nickname provided the perfect foundation for a fictional embodiment of primal fear, the aristocratic, undead predator. Stoker's novel cemented Dracula as a global icon of horror, forever linking the name to the supernatural undead.
The modern legacy. Today, Vlad Tepes, or Dracula, exists in multiple, often conflicting dimensions. The national hero. In Romania, particularly around sites like Poianari Castle, Târgoviște, and Sighișoara, his reputed birthplace, he is promoted as a national hero, a defender of Christianity and Romanian lands against Ottoman invasion. Statues stand, souvenirs abound. The historical enigma. Scholars continue to debate his reign, his psychology, and his impact. Was he a sadistic monster, a pragmatic tyrant, a national liberator ahead of his time, or a terrifying blend of all three? New archival research and archaeological findings slowly add nuance. The pop culture phenomenon. Thanks to Stoker, Vlad is irrevocably tied to the vampire mythos. Count Dracula is one of the most recognizable fictional characters globally, spawning countless films, books, TV shows, video games, and merchandise. This fictional persona often overshadows and grotesquely distorts the historical man. The dark tourist magnet. Bran Castle, inaccurately but persistently marketed as Dracula's Castle, draws hundreds of thousands of tourists annually, eager to connect with the Gothic legend, often with little awareness of the complex historical figure behind the name. Vlad III Dracula's grave remains lost. Snagov Monastery, periodically searched, yields no definitive answers. Perhaps it's fitting. His body vanished, but his legacy endures, fractured, contested, immortal. He is the prince who impaled thousands to forge order, the hostage who mastered his captors, the warrior who defied an empire, the tyrant betrayed by Christendom, the historical figure consumed by his own monstrous myth. He is Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Dracula, son of the dragon, a shadow forever stretching across history, folklore, and the darkest corners of the human imagination, a chilling reminder of the depths of cruelty and the fierce, terrible will to survive and rule. The dragon's shadow is long, and it still falls upon us.